So Hans Utter, welcome back to the Gnostic Media Podcast. It's been a little over 4 years since you were on last.
Yeah, well, it's great to be back, Jan.
And this is a subject that I've wanted to do a show on for a couple of years. I was going to have someone else do it a while ago, and you had reached out to me, and we kind of talked about it. So now we're going to be talking about music, mind control, and psychobiology.
Yes.
So why don't you start off by telling the audience a little bit about yourself? It's been a while, and obviously before you were on, you didn't have a doctor's degree, so now it's Dr. Hans Utter.
Yeah, I managed to graduate and went through the academic grinder, so to speak, came out the other end, mostly intact.
Mostly.
Yeah. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But basically, my background is I've been involved in music since I was a child. Right now, I'm actually not currently working in the academic universe. I'm just a professional musician. But I've been involved in music since I was a kid, and I got drawn towards the cultural aspects of music, kind of the broader implications, I'd say kind of from the beginning. And then when I was in college, I ended up deciding to go to India. So basically, my last year of college, I went and lived in India for about 5 years, partially because it's kind of a long story, but I was involved with various subcultures, jazz and rainbow tribe, stuff like that. And then when I came back and worked for a while as a musician and went back to graduate school, and that's kind of how I ended up here. Yeah, so then my academic research, I think that both my work, in the music industry, and as well as my experience, living in, different cultures, really gave me kind of, I think, some insight into this issue. We just talk about music and mind control. And my first research we had talked about on my previous interview, I lived with a tribe in the Northwest Himalayas, right? And they used music as sort of a means of ritual induction, for trance and things like that. And it also served as a living text for their whole society. And that's kind of one aspect of music that we'll kind of touch on. And then my doctoral research was based on Indian classical music, primarily the sitar. And in that, I ended up delving into really a broad array of entire historical processes involved in music, but also, very interestingly, the direct use of music as a means of political and social control, which we'll get into later. And in fact, if you look at the Hindu-Muslim conflicts around the world, this has its roots several centuries ago. You can go back to the 1750s and find the roots of this. So that's, kind of my background. And then also going through the contemporary academic universe with its emphasis on a lot on the postmodernist ideologies and the massive influx of ideas from the Frankfurt School and deconstructionism, et cetera, and having to kind of go through this process and seeing how ingrained it had become, and then finding that even though I was not being confrontational, even though I was not choosing to ruffle feathers, I encountered a great deal of opposition, and this really clarified to me the necessity of kind of delving into these subjects because I'd seen them firsthand so many ways. So, yeah.
Yeah, I've been there, done that. And what's interesting is that when I first started doing my research into Gordon Wasson, the academic community was fairly encouraging. It was almost like, oh, haha, it's a joke, let's see how far you get. And then when I found all of the documentation, went through all of the university archives and everything, then all of those same people who were encouraging before were suddenly, publicly attacking me for daring to publish the documents and the quotes that I found in the university archives, et cetera. So, It's definitely there. Anyway, with Wasson and that whole thing, it's the resistance that you get from within the community. That's what myself, and it appears you as well, is what tipped me off to go and look there in the first place. Because it's like the more resistance I got, as the old cliche, you get the most flack when you're over the target, right? And so their attacks encouraged me to keep looking in the directions that they didn't want me to look.
Yeah, and a lot of these, out of your Pierre Bourdieu, the French kind of sociologist, talks about the habitus, right? Which are these almost unconsciously learned boundaries of discourse and things like that become, not, see, across the board, a lot of people are actually conditioned, right? And so you can even look at the academy to a certain degree operating as a massive conditioning system, right? So you have there's people that are much more aware, fully aware of what's going on. There's other people that just respond, as with certain slogans, certain particular types of discussion, people have immediately an emotional, palpable response, right? Because that's threatening the boundaries of this domain and, in a sense, the quote unquote cultural capital of the institution, and James Petrus, talks about this a bit, of the, the importance of the academic nexus as a, praxis of control of ideas, of thoughts, and in fact, of what is the field of allowable discourse, right? And that's, as we see every day, it gets more and more narrow and more extreme in certain directions. But
absolutely. All right, so let's see. You sent me a really thorough outline to get into a lot of this area, and you had to actually go to the university and do some digging just to get some stuff. So hopefully you were successful in that.
Yeah, I have. I think the second part of the interview, I'm going to go through and open up some original documents to really understand, how this is working. But on the other side is that it's very important to really have this broad perspective to understand how this is working, because it's not just one thing, right? It's multiple elements, and it's something that a lot of the insights, right? If you look at anthropology, if you look at a lot of scientific research, if you look at research into hypnosis, et cetera, all this stuff is really being combined. And in a certain way, with music, we have really one of the ideal and most powerful means of social manipulation and control, as well as an ideal means of, you'd say, liberation, of creating group solidarity. So just as much as the power can be used negatively, it has a very positive force. But it's very important to contextualize and really understand all these interlocking elements and how they operate together.
Well, and before we start off here, and then you can go from here, maybe use it, I don't know if you can use this as a launching point, but I was going through a lot of audio archives that I have here, and I found a recording of a former radio host, I think he's former, from the LA area, from KLOS Radio, named Jim Ladd. And he had done a series called The History of FM Radio. And unfortunately, like half of one of the tapes, it's like 5 hours long or 5.5 hours long. I think I'm missing the last 30 minutes of it. But in this talk, he exposes if you're listening between the lines, he's exposing how essentially FM radio had to launch before the rock and roll movement could go with it. And there was only like a handful, maybe 11 or 12, if I recall correctly, FM stations in the country. And one of them was KPFA up in Berkeley, where the Grateful Dead came out of, etc. But it appears that the amplitude modulation, or AM radio, which only carries one signal, was not sufficient for what they wanted to accomplish with rock music. So they came out with FM music, and they were able to separate left and right signals in the FM signal frequency modulation and, have these two signals piggybacked that they could target then the left and right hemispheres of the brain, creating a slight separation in the timing of the music.
This is Interview. Tonight we begin our 6-part special on the history of FM radio, an inside look at the medium and the people behind it who have changed our lives. We'll be back with host Jim Ladd and Interview's History of FM Radio right after this.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Jim Ladd. At the moment of this writing, it is 9:02 p.m. on April 16th, 1978.
Yeah, well, no, that's very interesting, because if you look at the audio, the spectrum of sound, right, going to the subsonic, infrasound, 20 hertz and below, you have frequencies that directly operate on you could say the reptilian brain, on biological functions, creating an intense fear response. You can have people go to the bathroom. There's all kinds of stuff. There's been a lot of studies on this. They're inaudible, right? But through the cancellation, binaural beats, you can have two frequencies that are very close to each other, and then your brain will actually create that subsonic or infrasonic frequency through that cancellation process, right? So and there's also ultrasound. So we'll get into that in more detail and talk about all of these uses of, you could say is, the technology coming out of electronic warfare divisions and things like that, and how this can be used, and even with the carrier waves embedded, in different frequencies, and really working on the human biology, right? That's why I talk about psychobiology, because the psychobiology, working at the psychology, the biology, the biological aspect of the body, as well as the psychological aspects, are being directly influenced, and usually in a preconscious way, but also very overtly as well. So,
all right. So where do we begin here?
Well, I like to begin just a quote with one of my heroes, in quotes, Jose Delgado. Quote, "We need a program of psychosurgery and political control of our society. The purpose is physical control of the mind. Everyone who deviates from the given norm can be surgically mutilated. The individual may think that the most important reality is his own existence, but this is only his personal point of view. This lacks historical perspective. Man does not have the right to develop his own mind. This kind of liberal orientation has great appeal. We must electrically control the brain. Someday, armies and generals will be controlled by electrical simulation of the brain." And that's from the Congressional Record, February 24th, 1974. But
let me just interject right there. Jose Delgado was an MK Ultra doctor for the CIA, and he worked on MK Ultra Subproject 94 and 142. And interestingly, he worked in the office next door to Richard Allen Miller, who developed some of these identical theories, and using, he's the one that did some of the studies for sounds, for mind control and stuff for the military, including he wrote books, Electro Magic, Diamond Body, and Yogatronics.
Okay. Yeah, well, I think it's impossible really to separate this process, right, from military psychological research, as well as from cultural, social manipulation, and also from large scale economies, right? Economics as well. So all of these elements and forces and factors are combined together. And a lot of times, again, we have compartmentalization of research and things like that. So someone is working on a specific neuroscience project. Even I've done a lot of work on music cognition and things like that. So you're working on one specific thing, one very small study, but then this whole study can be used in a very different way. So it's certainly not to presuppose that everybody is aware of what they're doing and is conscious of the ramifications. But yeah, certainly this is directly tied in with MK Ultra and with a lot of other various projects, and also directly with warfare war propaganda, psychological warfare, etc.
All right, so Hans, we've switched. You switched rooms to try to get control over the glitch that we were having with your video there. I don't know if we've been successful, hopefully. But now you're in your music studio, and so you look less academic with your books behind you, but now you look like a musician, so it works out.
Okay, you get to see the both phases. Next, we can go to my private sauna. No.
I don't know about that. I'll leave you to that one.
My hot yoga room. No.
There you go. All right, so where were we?
Okay, yeah, well, I was sort of talking about a broad discussion of how music is connected with, various MK Ultra projects and things like that, military intelligence, etc. But I think I just want to stress that music really is an ideal tool for social manipulation, right? So we're not just looking at the creation of mass movements, which is very important, but we're also looking at a way to manipulate the very functioning of the brain, right? And even to transform the mind, right? It can actually transform your brain, through neuroplasticity, right? Your brain can be changed in certain ways. So it's really something with a lot of ramifications. But again, I don't think you can divorce one aspect from the other. I think they're all closely correlated, in terms of a possibility of creating a very comprehensive sort of program, right, for social or individual. To really understand this process, you have to look at social organization. You have to look at also neuroscience and things like that, right? So it's not even a means just to manipulate social movements, but can directly work on the brain, your mind's ability to function, or how you even perceive reality, right? So it's quite an interesting subject, and hopefully we can cover enough to give people sort of a toolkit to approach even a lot of other cases and look at even other ramifications of this whole issue. So I just want to give another quote from the psychiatrist William Sargent. He said that from Stone Age to Hitler, from Beatles to modern pop culture, the brain of man has been constantly swayed by the same physiological techniques. Reason is dethroned, the normal brain computer is temporarily put out of action, and new ideas and beliefs are uncritically accepted. So there's another, example of how to support this hypothesis.
And do I need to say that he ironically was also MK Ultra and worked out of England, and he is the author of Battle for the Mind?
Yes. So exactly, and so we're seeing, from
we're already beginning to see a pattern of these guys here, huh?
I think so. Yeah, when we talk about the Rockefeller Project, the radio project funded by the Rockefeller Institute, we see a lot of this stuff coming together.
All right, so why don't we go through some of these items you have here? Why don't we go through the macro, social, and cognitive aspects of this?
Okay. Yeah, so it's very hard, as I mentioned, to separate the use of music in a large scale setting or within groups, like group identity, group processes, even as a fulcrum for action, change, identity within a broad society, within a single group, and also within the individual mind. So some examples of this are gangster rap music, which has been shown in studies to direct the amount of time, amount of interest, and this is done with African-American students, the amount of interest they have in hip-hop music correlates with 1, a higher sense of self-esteem, 2, a much larger incidence of behavior problems, 3, a much greater incidence in academic difficulties and dropout rates. So, as well as being connected with crime, increased crime and things like that. So these studies have actually correlated listeners, how much people are exposed to a particular type of music, and we see a social aspect in terms of behavior patterns, but also a cognitive aspect in terms of dramatically decreased academic performance. So that's an example of how social and cognitive aspects are kind of merged. If we look at the rock music revolution and hippies, the hippie movement, we see the development, or dare I say, construction of a large-scale social movement based on music, the ritual of music, and based on creating a opposition, in very large quotation, to the establishment.
All right, so we were just talking about rock music and hippies, and I had to interrupt you because we had some bad glare, and it was making marks on your face and the window in the background, etc. So we've got that fixed. So sorry to interrupt, and let's continue with rock music and hippies, etc.
Okay. Yeah, so this is an example, again, of a large-scale social movement with particular rituals being directly connected with music. Another example of this is jazz music and heroin distribution. So when the Central Intelligence Agency began to distribute heroin, they directly and specifically targeted jazz musicians in this particular community.
Now, who was doing that? Jazz, started pretty early. It was kind of the beginnings of it. The CIA was founded in '47. So
this is the early 1950s.
Okay.
So even coming from OSS, and I'll get into that in more detail.
Okay,
again.
sure.
Yeah, but the reason for that was considered that there's a racist component where they thought the black, let's give heroin to the blacks. But then, of course, we look at the beat movement, William S. Burroughs, and this heroin culture being transformed moving forward. Look at electronic music and rave culture, distribution of ecstasy, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the psychological, psychobiological effects of electronic music. Another example is the Frankfurt School, and their very direct, if somewhat veiled, assault on the entire edifice of Western culture and society. And this went through a number of different permutations. Adorno is certainly one of the most important figures in that, Marcuse also. And then electronic mind control, which can be a bit of a controversial topic, but there's enough research, there's enough patents to substantiate the utilization of music and or sound and other aspects, including light and things like that, into open air mind control experiments and things of that nature. Another example, we look at contemporary music, is even this introduction of very blatant satanic / you could say demonic occult elements into music. An example being Keisha. Everyone can check out the video Die Young, which is really over the top. I don't know if you've seen that, Jan. Have you seen that?
I have not.
It just shows everything from human sacrifice to bestiality to just a plethora of massive amounts of occult symbols in a song that's aimed for children. I tried to show it to a friend of mine. He couldn't watch more than 30 seconds of it. So that's really extreme, blatant example of that. And there's also the tone, the basic pitch to being A440, which is a very interesting subject, which we'll talk about in detail. And finally, we'll also, I want to look at specific musical examples. So once I kind of go through some of this theoretical aspects, try to apply this to music, and so people can see for themselves and also have a better methodology of understanding what's going on, with music and things like that.
All right, so how does music work, and what's the dynamic model of social functionality?
Okay, well, when you want to approach music, you, as I mentioned, need to have a very large-scale perspective as well as a very detailed or a small scale perspective. So if you use a dynamic macro-sociological perspective, what that means is you're looking at the society as being something that's constantly in flux, constantly in motion, but it's also not based just on unification, but it's also based on conflict. It's based on group identity and divisions between groups, right? So you have consensus and conflict. So within, well, the use of music, but also within society itself, you have consensus, people moving towards a particular perspective, and you have conflict within specific groups or specific movements to the society as a whole. Music also within this dynamic model is very useful for social cohesion. And this is something we can see in primitive tribal societies. We can see this in just walk out your door and look around and the kids and look at their identities, right? And social cohesion is very important in creating and defining social divisions, classes, subcultures, as well as propagating and enforcing ideology.
So what you're getting at is like, okay, so there was the acid rock of the 60s, early 70s, then we get the hard rock, the Ozzy Osbourne, the Black Sabbath, and all of that stuff, and then in the early 80s, out comes the new wave movement, and then in the 2000s, they come out with the emo music, etc. So these are, would those create subdivisions within the culture? And I do remember in high school, in fact, each of the groups of students was pretty much divided by what type of music they listened to.
Exactly. That's exactly correct. And so, yeah, it's an example of how you can see that yourself. And in fact, as I get into a little bit more, we'll see how this is actually a planned, the idea of creating specific manipulable units of society, right? So it's much easier to manipulate a particular group. And it's easy once you can define the parameters of that group's experience, then you can just sort of sit there behind the scenes and, flip switches, so to speak. Of course, it's more complicated than that, but you're exactly correct in how that works. And in fact, the creation, I'll just give a brief example. In America, you used to have concert programs, in the 19th century where you'd have a folk song, an operetta, you'd have, some type of a dance piece, all in one concert program. But as America's social and class definitions became much more solidified, the higher culture was sort of reserved for the new developing economic and cultural elites. And this was a way to define their culture. And you no longer had these sort of fluid programs, right? And this also mirrored the more fluid nature of American society. But for example, once you have someone defining themselves as part of a specific subculture, they are going to be brought into the broader ideology, so to speak, of that subculture, and will actually help and shape and form their identity. At the same time, it's creating a group division. If you look at punk rockers and metalheads, even there, you take a certain style of music, suddenly you create divisions between people, right? You're creating social division. And as well as you're creating in-group cohesion through that, right? So it's a very interesting process.
And then, with the concerts and the raves and all of that, and I don't want to give away too much, but once you get thousands of people into a location like that, people are much more manipulable when they are in large groups than when they are in an individual setting. So people get caught up in the whole group think and group actions and stuff, and then they're able to be manipulated that way as well.
Yeah, and especially if they're ingested large amounts of LSD or something.
Or mushrooms, etc., which create extensive hypersuggestibility.
Yeah, and permeability of the brain. And then we'll even look at how the influence on even the motor cortex, etc. I mean, so yeah, you're looking at very complex, but very well thought out, systems.
Social constructs, right?
Yeah. So going from that, I came up with sort of a rubric, so to speak, of 8 aspects of how music works for behavioral control. And I'll give a few examples for that, right? So one aspect is behavioral conformity, right? So as you know, as I mentioned before, when you create a group, you create a type of group compliance. You also create a homogenization of in-group behavior, right? So if you're part of a particular subculture, you're going to have that additional pressure to conform and comply with those group norms, right? So you create an in-group nexus or matrices for these particular types of behavior, whether that's, you know, putting a safety pin in your nose, or whether that's putting on a tuxedo and going to a classical music concert, right? And another part of that behavioral conformity is performance events as rituals, right? So you look at ritual is and has been a fundamental component of human culture and society from the beginning, right? So any type of ritual is you have a sequence of particular behaviors that have a certain type of separation from normal daily life, right? So it becomes almost like a metaphysical experience. And a ritual has various components, and that ritual, once it has taken effect or has begun, then the ritual can sort of take on its own momentum, right? And so that's there's performance studies and ritual studies, but even in a simple aspect of that is brushing your teeth, right? So in a sense, wake up in the morning, you brush your teeth. Do you think about that? No, that's an unconscious habit pattern. When you're engaged in a ritual, whether it's a church ritual, whether it's a wedding, you're not only reinforcing transition points and cultural norms, but you're also reinforcing this habitual behavior patterns, which actually can operate outside cognitive influence, right? So there's a lot of studies on this. There's just one example, a guy from the neuroscience literature had severe brain damage, right? He had encephalitis, so he couldn't remember anything, right? You talk to him, 1 minute later, he forget things, but he was able to go on walks by himself because he developed this habit pattern. So this actually operates in a much more primitive part of the brain. So when you access that and create these rituals, you have something very, very powerful that once this is engaged, unless the person interrupts it or is conscious of it, this will take over, you know, and in fact, they'll be in behavior without even knowing what they're doing.
And then they just, so it would be like when you see these 60s and 70-year-olds, when they hear the Grateful Dead or the Doors play on the radio, they automatically kind of get into that, you know, that kind of zone, and they're, oh yeah, this is my music from when I was a kid. And it seems like they embed that ritual, whether it's like the clothing that that particular group wears or whatever they were doing in the rock concert rituals and all of that they embed that into the minds of the teenagers, and then you can see it 50 years on being triggered by a song on the radio.
And very interestingly enough, that these habit patterns, right? And I can go into this a little bit more research. The scientific research on this is very clear, right? There is no doubt. These are permanent, right? So these are permanent habits. Like, for example, if you're a smoker, you can quit smoking. You can rewrite a new habit into your brain, but that old habit pattern can be cued at any time, especially at points of emotional arousal, stress, etc. So these can become permanent, right? And rituals are, they're extremely powerful. And, as you look at religion, right? Religion is, a collection of rituals, etc. So you're exactly right. And that's what's very interesting about this. But what's also interesting, as I said, that this is permanent. This is always there. Once you're inscribed with this, you can overwrite this pattern, but this can also be triggered again. It's still there in this, it's prefrontal cortex mode, being inscribed in your mind.
So I'm permanently embedded with Danny Elfman and Oingo Boingo from when I was 14.
Oh, please don't play Oingo. Oh, when I hear the flock of seagulls, I just start dancing. No, I mean, that's also... And we'll look at, and there's a whole other range of meanings associative and stuff. But yeah, exactly. But especially with rituals, especially with group, as you mentioned, the mass ritual, the group ritual, this is amplified to 1,000-fold, right? Even there's a lot of research on changing group dynamics and group habits, because groups have their own habit patterns or their own ritual behavioral patterns, right? And so, yeah, exactly right. But of course, you can rewrite this. So after, if you listen to enough Wagner, it'll, Oingo Boingo won't have any more influence on you, right? Or maybe not. Okay, and so another aspect of this behavioral conformity is transmit and subconsciously encode linguistic messages, right? So pop music, encoding linguistic messages, encoding social codes, behavioral codes, right? And this even goes, you can look at traditional ballads. You can look at so many types of music where linguistic messages are being encoded. And a lot of times these are going subconsciously, right? So this, and even, for example, taking drugs, hurting yourself, self-harm messages can be easily programmed into music. Think about Don't Fear the Reaper, right? That's a pretty dark song. That's about suicide, right? And Blue Oyster Cult. That's encoding a suicide message in the brain. Now, whether or not that's going to operate or take hold is conjectural, but that is there. Those are, unless you've consciously, you're aware of it, it's part of your consciousness. It's just operating in the background.
Now, are you familiar with the work of Darren Brown out of England?
Oh, a bit. Yeah,
okay, yeah, he did a episode about 10 years ago where he used one of the Jackson 5 songs to trigger these guys, this group of people that he had selected out of a crowd to attempt to rob the Bank of England. And every time they would cue, when they cued the Jackson 5 song, when these guys were walking down the street, they immediately went over and tried to commit the robbery.
Yeah, no, that shows right there in your face, right? It's very, very powerful, and it's much more easy to observe in small groups, right? When you've got a mass movement with, millions of people involved, right? But these also, this is also used to embed, say, even for advertising purposes, for military purposes, for, and it's sort of in a traditional or more well-balanced society, it embeds cultural norms, right? It helps to embed things like that. But so that's another important aspect. Another example of why these behaviors are so important is because of the use of rhythms, right? Rhythms, particular tones, frequencies, and I'll get into later about the perceptual aspect, like how music works, musical perception functions. But you also have entrainment, right? And entrainment is a process of where two vibrating or oscillating bodies will start to link in phase oscillation, right? And
right.
So, and this is, entrainment has been researched quite a bit. This is how, for example, infrasonic, subsonic weapons work. Your brain starts, here's the frequency, your brain actually starts operating on that frequency, and next thing you know, you have a massive terror response, or you'll defecate in your pants, whatever. That's actually, so the process of entrainment also works for group dynamics, right? You got 10,000 people chanting and cheering together. Your physiology is going to entrain with those people. Your actual brain function, even your heart rate, will start phase locking with that rhythmic stimulus.
Wow. And you're talking about like when you get that reverberation, that kind of wah, 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 wah thing going on. Is that what that is?
No, it's that's a beat, a frequency beat. This basically works with any type of vibrating body, right? There is, when you put two clocks together, they'll start clicking in phase. This actually operates on the cellular level, okay? So this is this goes down, even to the atomic, subatomic level. Okay. But this is basically where if you listen, your heart rate, for example, let's say if you're with someone who's very agitated, very angry, they're talking in a very quick manner, you might start to notice, you might start to feel your heart rate increase. You might start to feel anger, things like that, right? And that's because biologically, neurologically, you're starting to phase lock to these particular frequency patterns. And I'll go into a little more explanation of how that works, but it's a very, very interesting phenomenon, actually. And it's one of those things, there's really no explanation for it per se, but it's there. And as I said, it does operate even on a cellular level.
It would just be like when women spend a lot of time together, they begin to have their periods in synchronicity.
Exactly. 100%. That's exactly what I'm talking about. And it's something that operates on multiple planes, right? Anything, the diurnal cycle, day to night cycle, things like that, sleep patterns. But yeah, so it's a very, very powerful process that operates. Even if you look at 8-hour workday, the school with the Pavlovian bell, it is that's a type you can entrain to periods of temporality, like this much time you'll be here, this, things like that. So, and also it can be used to fragment consciousness, to fragment your attentional span, right? So you can't focus on things because you're constantly
because they interrupt it every hour, etc., and then you never spend more than an hour focusing on any particular subject, and they can shorten attention span.
Exactly. Yeah. So very interesting. And so this behavioral conformity, this influences group compliance again, and overall social conformity to a particular in-group, to a particular type of behavior, or even large-scale compliance to all kinds of things, right? So this is very powerful, especially when taken in conjunction with psychological factors. Identity, I want to belong, I want to be part of something, right? I don't want to be weird. Everyone's walking this way, I have to walk that way. You're shopping and you hear this music. I'll explain how this also works, with it for music, for all kinds of things. Just a brief aside, music was based on this to increase worker productivity, to work on arousal cycles. This is not a work song, right? This is working on the brain's arousal cycles to increase productivity at certain lull periods, right? You get a little bit before lunch, you're getting tired, you're going to increase the music's tempo. We're going to do this. And this, obviously this multi-billion-dollar corporation wouldn't be in existence if this was just idle speculation. And another aspect is behavioral conformity. Just one other little bullet point for that is weaponized anthropology, creating a tribal identity in the hippie movement, right? Using social organization of tribes and applying this to a mass cultural movement, right? And so all of this research can be used for very direct construction of social reality for mass groups of people. And it's actually, I'm sure they had a lot of fun with it, creating this stuff. Sure. Because but the fact is it works so well. It's
sure, and when you think of like Owsley Stanley and these guys making all the LSD, and then he was also the same guy who developed the Grateful Dead sound system, and he's the guy developing the drugs, sound system drugs. So, then you can begin to see and understand what the Grateful Dead was doing and why they had the world's largest sound system at the time, probably still.
Yeah, or even if you just on a much more narrow band, if you look at the American Folklife Anthology, right, which was kind of a weird little anthology that was lionized by Dylan, by the Grateful Dead. This is their Bible, not necessarily representative of the best music in America, but representative of these kind of odd examples, but sort of purveying this primitivist, neo-feudal concept of music and culture, as well as social norms, and return to the great primitive nature mind or whatever, So,
yeah, very interesting. Well, let's get into the manipulation and persuasion factors.
Okay, yeah, so I did allude to that a little bit, but music can be used very directly for manipulation, which is that you're being manipulated outside of your own conscious control, right? You are being, your behavior is being modified on a subconscious manner, or you're being persuaded to do something, whether through semiotic, that is linguistic means, symbolic means, right? And musical sound itself can function as a type of a signifier. Should I go into semiotics or?
Sure.
Okay, so semiotics is a science of signs and symbols, right? And you have various schools of that. William Peirce is 19th, early 20th century philosopher. It's very important for the understanding of signs. And signs or symbols are really of how we make sense of the world around us, right? And if you can start to manipulate those signs, if you can manipulate someone's ability to process signs, to create meaningfully coherent sequences of events, of influences, etc., you have a great deal of power. But also you can change the function of language, right? You can change the content of language. You can change the meanings of particular words. You can create different types of associations with particular phrases, etc. But the semiotic or symbolic aspect of music is very important. Also, in a way, for example, if you hear the national anthem, you hear those few bars, you stand up and salute the flag. Or maybe not that way, but but basically, this is I'll get into this more detail, but it's a very interesting aspect. Another important part of this is development of Muzak, which I already sort of alluded to, which is connected with Rockefeller Foundation, which is also connected with development of large-scale industries and to create a more docile and effective workforce. And this was actually a Major General Squire in World War I developed something called wired, I think it was wired music or something like that, using power lines and telephone lines to transmit music as opposed to the wireless radio transmitters. And this was employed in Muzak and other modes of having music being transmitted through electronic wiring / telephone lines. And this also can pertain with some of these other types of carrier wave signals, ultrasound, little more sinister uses of electronic warfare. So
are you saying like your wires in your house could even be pumping this stuff in, or what?
Oh yeah, your electronic wire in your house may use as carrier waves for all kinds of different frequencies. I always try to have a pretty strong factual basis for what I talk about, but there's a lot of examples of people describing how, they suddenly start getting these horrible headaches. They get these like paranoia, they have heart palpitations, and it turns out certain frequencies are being run through the electrical system of the house. So it's very easy to do.
So now, I guess if you knew that, then you could put some capacitors on the line, some probably pretty big ones, and control the frequencies that were coming through, couldn't you?
Oh, certainly. Yeah. I mean, if you're aware of it, yeah, you could do that. But how about the smart meters? That's right there. That's an example of this, of this concept being applied, in a sort of a more modern way. And so that's so manipulating persuasion, and again, that's for shopping, use for advertising, right? You see, for example, I'm a 65-year-old hippie. I grew up with whoever, the Beatles, and suddenly I see an ad for a car, and I hear that music, boom, immediate association of my enjoyment of that with this car. And I may not even be aware of it. I'll go out and buy one of the cars or buy a product, right? So that's use in advertising, persuasion, etc. Good.
Oh, I was just thinking over the years as I've been uncovering MK Ultra, first you stop watching TV, but you don't really think about killing the radio also. And it's like you really have to start paying attention to this stuff. And, I notice how the radio, it's like you turn on the radio and most of the stations are the exact same music that they were 50 years ago. So why is that? Why are they constantly beating the late 60s, early 70s music into us for 5 decades now?
Yeah, no, I'll get to that in much more detail because that is a very fascinating thing, right? And this, now when you go to a shopping center, right, you can't go anywhere without hearing this rock music, right? This music of rebellion. Everywhere you go, this is being rammed down your throat constantly.
So you're saying that they're using hypnotic suggestion essentially through the music to encourage rebellion and revolutionary type behavior. Is that correct?
Well, you have to look at this type of rebellion is actually, there's a great quote. I don't think it's Henry Miller. I forget the person who said this quote, but he's talking about going to like a rock concert. He said that they think they're breaking free from society, but with every dance step and every note of music, they're binding the chains of industrialization tighter around them. Right.
Wow.
So this is a type of rebellion which feeds directly into the control mechanism and the control grid. And so it's, and literally but it's also, well, I don't want to jump ahead too far, but this affects your ability to perceive the past and the future. It kind of locks you in this static sort of time, takes away your sense of historical narrative. It's very, I said, this is very, I think I actually find it very interesting, but yeah, so it's not one thing, it's many things, right? And of course, this is going to work differently on different individuals, but this is being used, and this is again being researched for 100 years plus. So this is not an accident. This is not just, well, also they own all these back catalogs for the record companies, but there's a lot of reasons for it. And yeah, so.
All right, what next here?
Okay, so another aspect of music and behavioral control is defining and reinforcing social identity. Music is used for the process of enculturation. If you look at an African tribe, people will learn music directly by participating, right? They're going to pick it up. They'll be around the drum. They'll start playing the drum, but they're being inscribed with the whole host of the particular values of this society, right? So enculturation is a process of gradually absorbing values, of absorbing cultural modes and means and social identity. So it not only defines, but reinforces social identity. And it also marks and constructs social group boundaries. So these social identities are created, for example, you go back in the day when someone has a boombox, right? He's walking there creating a field of his social identity, right? This is a social identity. He's identifying himself. He's also repelling others at the same time, right? So right there, you can see the sonic field as a direct means of operating and performing his identity, but also excluding others, right? So very interesting aspect of that. And enculturation is maybe not directly apparent now, but especially in tribal societies, very, very directly used for.
That's a really interesting point because in my article in Thujan's What's in a Name, I had a quote. I'm just trying to pull it up here from Marlene Dobkin de Rios. And she talks about, psychedelics being used to inculcate. She says psychedelic substances like ayahuasca create a state of hypersuggestibility in which persons are very open to being influenced by others. Many traditional cultures have utilized this condition to inculcate cultural values and behaviors in young people as they receive initiation into adulthood. In the West, counterculture values can be inculcated in young people when using these psychedelics, especially when using them in an antinomian context. And of course, antinomian means release by grace from the obligation of observing moral law. So if you're coupling the psychedelics with the music, which is obviously what they did, then you're basically, it's like a double reinforcement system there.
Exactly. And in fact, the use of psychedelics, what you have is a ramped up, highly accelerated process of enculturation, right? So in a tribal society, maybe this would take 10 years to totally reinforce the entire group cultural norms. Even your sense of spatial boundaries, your sense of relationality, how you speak, but with psychedelics, you can do this very, very quickly, and you can do it in such a way that the participant is not really aware of it. Whereas if you're part of some cult, it may take a year for that to be inscribed in your mind. Exactly right.
Yeah, so you fill, you fill the Rose Bowl stadium with 60, 100,000 people, and then you bring in Pink Floyd, and you bring in the acid, and boom, there you go.
Yeah, and then that's even these sort of, you describe all kinds of values and norms are being inscribed, or in a much more nefarious way, because, whether your spiritual beliefs are or not, if you look at, for example, the Altamont concert, Rolling Stones, that's a large-scale, satanic human sacrifice ritual being undertaken on the mass mind, the mass consciousness. So yeah, and this is if you look at the increase in violence and all this stuff, I mean, this is a very, very powerful tool, but in a sense you're enculturating a social norm, and as well as multiple other things through this.
And just real quick, speaking of Altamont, you've got you've got now I just forgot his name. The lead singer of the Rolling Stones. He's on stage. Mick Jagger. Yeah. Thank you. I don't know how, it was like right there and it just wouldn't come. But he's on stage and he's wearing a leather outfit that's half red, half black.
Yeah.
And, so he's essentially playing Satan, and then his Hell's Angels are all around him.
Yes.
And then George Lucas, Lucifer, is on the camera. Yes. Behind, filming the entire murder of Meredith Hunter. And so when you step back and you see it from this, Satan, Hell's Angels, the murder, Lucifer on the camera filming, and then Lucifer becomes famous with THX and Star Wars and all of that immediately following this event, essentially. Anyway, a little digression there, sorry.
No, exactly, man. Excellent point, because, and already we can see, when I look at, I list all these aspects, we see this interlocking web. I use like dynamic system theory, I'll talk about a bit later, but semiotic, right? I mentioned the semiotic aspect, symbolic aspect. You've got this red and white suit, right? Satanic colors. You have a mass purveyance of symbols at the same time. And if you get, say, Michael Hoffman talks about the alchemical transformation of humanity, right? So you look at these are large-scale rituals that are being undertaken. So yeah, very interesting, and that's completely correct. One other aspect of that is, marking and constructing. So, okay, we already talked about the social group boundaries. But another aspect, aspect number 4, is sorting people into groups, large-scale societies. How do you create groups in society? How are people sorted, right? And this is something where, if you look at the problem of creating a technotronic control grid, it's very difficult when you have all these individuals, right? Even if you have a bunch of individual farmers or people that know their constitutional rights. It's a lot harder, but once you can create these social groups, you can also sort them, and you can sort them by their music preferences. This person liked this music. Here's our group. Also used for advertising, demographics, etc. At the same time, you can create social fragmentation, right? You can fragment society. You suddenly have, Bobby comes home and their parents are listening to Bach, and he throws on, Velvet Underground. You've just created social fragmentation, and he may think this is really cool. Suddenly he's created a rift with his parents, and suddenly Bobby is going to want to join this other group, but then that group can be sorted, right? You can look at this group from the top down and look at these particular social groups, age demographics, etc.
And one other thing I notice about each of these groups is they all wear their particular military uniform. The punk rockers have the punk rock military uniform. The Grateful Dead heads are, they've got their tie-dye uniform, and the New Wavers have their uniform, etc. They've all got their particular uniform that goes, the whole look, the dress, everything that goes with that particular group. So you can see it's a tribe, it's a group, it's like a little military order. It's like them, here, join our group, here's your uniform.
Exactly right. And yeah, and with the the clothing styles, right? That's very important because this is another way of marking yourself. And that's why I mentioned the weaponized anthropology, so to speak. If you look at a tribe, for example, you're a tribe somewhere in the Brazilian rainforest, you're going to recognize your tribe members by what they wear. That those clothings are going to represent and replicate your cultural social history. But also, for your group to survive, you have to have this group cohesion, right? So all that is there. And then when you turn this on a mass, large-scale industrial society, you can really have a lot of fun with your little pieces on your grand chessboard that you play with. Another aspect of this, or another example is iPod atomization, individual atomization, right? Instead of being part of a larger social group, I'm with my little headphones. I'm in my own world. I am separate. I'm on my little virtual world in front of my computer. I'm the separate atom. I'm just this fragment. So even I may identify with hip hop culture, right? And you can see this all over the world. You see people in Tibet that are dressing like hip hop guys, right? But at the same time, they may not even be part of a mass movement now. They may be part of their own little individual atomized existence. So it also can create a sense of false individuality or freedom.
Now, let's say, taking the concept of, basically since the days of beginning in late 1990s with MP3s, suddenly what we see is, instead of kids focusing on one type of music, they're pretty much focusing on everything from like the 1920s to now. Does that, would you say, undo any of this? Does it have sort of, because they're bringing in so many different types of music now that they didn't used to, or does it still perpetuate that same issue?
I think that there's a couple things there. Let me just start with the MP3, right? MP3s are reduction of the actual audio acoustic frequency.
It's even at its highest, it's only about a third of the original signal.
Yeah, and it's based on psychoacoustic principles to trick your brain into thinking you're hearing the full waveform. So you do have the MP3, the convenience is there, but you do have a degradation of the sound. You have a degradation.
Same with CD to record or to a tape deck.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. And then you have you do have an increasing virtualization, so you no longer have the physical artifact of the actual human interaction of having to hear music, of playing music at home, right? You have these libraries of thousands of recordings, right? So, but this is also positive. So it does break some of the conditioning for certain people, right? Certain people are really going to expand their horizons. On the other hand, they're going to become increasingly alienated from their peers who are listening to Keisha and Beyonce and whatever, because they're going to,
but they might also listen to that crap as well, and then not necessarily be excluded because they're so expansive in their musical taste.
Yeah, I mean that's something. I mean, this is something that's a relatively new phenomenon, so I can't really claim to know exactly what's going on. But there's it can have positive effects, but it also can create a very discursive, listening where you're just jumping from one thing to another thing, right? And
like TV and the remote control, just boom, 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 boom.
And I do that myself. I mean, I'm listening to something, 30 seconds, I'll get bored, I'll put something else on. So, but but great, yeah. And so the aspect, got to jump ahead here. Aspect number 5 is group coordination, right? So music is excellent for group level coordination. Military is a great example of that. We have military marches. You have a long history of that, right? And that's why actually music has been researched a great deal by the military. And this goes back tens of thousands of years, right? As soon as we had organized armies, they were using music or sound.
Drums, percussion, etc.
Yeah. And even to frighten particular armies, right? They use particular horns and they'd scare the other army off, but etc. But it's very good for cooperation and unity. So either whether it's marching together, and this also operates on the level of entrainment, right? You're working together with someone if you're on the chain gang. The chain gang.
The
slave gang. We have contemporary slavery, right, in our prisons. But you're going to work together with people, and you'll start to actually entrain, as well as creating the group cohesion. But it's excellent for coordinating people to do specific types of action.
So when you want them to all walk at a certain pace and keep in step because they're going to be running into each other and stuff, I guess you're going to want a snare drum and and a drum boy or whatever to march ahead to keep them all in unison. Is that the idea with that, or?
Yes, but it also creates a direct sense of relationality where you are part of the group. In fact, subsuming your identity into a collective whole. And also, even though like rhythm, right? People are singing when they're working, right? And you start singing, that actually makes the work much more palatable, and you coordinate the actions, but also you can take kind of unpleasant type of work, right? If you're breaking rocks on the chain gang and you're singing, suddenly, you're not only coordinating with this group, but you're also getting sort of a pleasure from this rhythmic, aspect of it. And then also protest movements, very important in protest movements, political campaigns, right? A song, you get everyone together. Yes, we can. All right. Or, so yeah, this is one of the kind of the more obvious examples of that. But look at this social protest movements and certain songs we can overcome. Great example of creating this mass action and using this music to really unify a force.
Or what about, for instance, Rage Against the Machine playing at the Democratic National Convention in Los Angeles? I mean, it's looking back, it's clear as day what they were doing with this new information you're providing.
Yeah, and also you should be aware that you can lead people gradually, right? Incremental. So, for example, I don't want to go too much into the cold aspect, but if you look at the example of Altamont, you look at a large-scale mass satanic ritual. Watch the Keisha video. It'll blow your mind where it's now right in your face, but you're leading people into particular behavior patterns, or you're reinscribing their mind.
Now, do you think it's okay to play a little clip of that in the video cut of this? Or
please do. Yeah,
do.
Awesome.
I mean, okay, so, ladies and gentlemen, we're warning you right now that we're cutting this in right there, essentially.
Let's make the most of the night like we're gonna die young. We're gonna die young.
Actually,
Yeah, please play that, because I think people really like that. Yeah. So no, exactly right. And so, for example, Rage Against the Machine, you have something that's really connected with maybe more radical politics. Oh, Democratic National Convention. So you're going to lead people, even if it's incrementally, to maybe a different political identification, right? So it's exactly what's happening there. Now one of the kind of the positive or negative aspects of music is also emotional manipulation, right? So this is, I think, number 6, I think it is. And so emotional manipulation, emotional expression, conflict resolution, or conflict generation. Okay, so music, an example of this can be film, right? And this has been studied quite a bit. Adorno was very important in understanding music and film.
But before you go on, explain who Adorno was real quick.
Theodore Adorno was, I think, really a seminal figure in our contemporary cultural landscape. He was a founding member and a primary member in the Frankfurt School, which developed in Germany. And with the wave of European kind of intellectuals coming to America to help rearrange the entire academic institutions. You can see this a little bit earlier with what happened with anthropology. You've got Herbert Marcuse out of UCLA, one-dimensional man. But Theodore Adorno was very important as a theoretician. He was definitely a Marxist, but the primary insight of the Frankfurt School was that our use of Marxism directly confronting society, right, through violent revolution and protest didn't work. So you had to transform the mind. You had to use, in a sense, mental and psychological and intellectual transformation to subvert and control and transform society.
Okay, so now he's also out of the Tavistock Institute, and he was also a Fabian socialist where Aldous Huxley worked. But, okay, so based on what you just said, we had the quote-unquote British invasion.
Yeah.
Right. And so now we see that, okay, so, and there's been a lot of speculation if Theodor Adorno had written a lot of the music for the Beatles. Now, I've researched, I haven't been able to find any documented evidence yet. I haven't looked in the right places yet. But, this goes along exactly with what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, Adorno's an interesting figure because Adorno was also a musician and a musicologist. He was a huge purveyor of atonality, right? So atonal music, destruction of basically, well, I'll get into this in more detail later, but basically looking at, you really want to remove the capitalist Western culture and dismantle it from within. And you can look at multiculturalism. You can look at what I think my next
neo-feudalism and the whole thing that we've been exposing here.
Whiteness studies, which is a great academic field that I'm really excited about. I don't know if you're familiar with whiteness studies, which calls for genocide of white people and white Europeans, which is actually Marcuse's wife is big into that. Multiculturalism, etc. Coming from the Frankfurt School, but that's a big topic. But Adorno also he hated what he called commodification or mass music. So he was a huge critic of mass music, of jazz, of rock, right? So he wrote all this stuff. He also hated Wagner. He looked at Wagner as fascistic music, as a commodified form of music. Everything's, based on this commodity reification, commodity culture. But he also worked with the Rockefeller Foundation, working with music, working with light and sound in music in these giant full-scale projects. The Radio Project, which worked with mass manipulation, work with music and sound, music and light, etc. So he was a very, very important figure, but also, he was also a musicologist, wrote about music. So he really covered a whole range of fields of activity. Primarily, people know him as sort of the critic of mass music. So if he actually did write the Beatles' music, it would be extremely ironic, considering he described jazz as like phantasmagorical, syncopation.
Most of these guys that do this stuff, they do create kind of a cover story like that. It's like Wasson constantly attacking the hippie movement and all the hippies in Huautla de Jimenez, while he's the one who created that entire thing, right?
Yeah, and you see that across the board, which is really interesting. And the intertwined, internested nature of this, which I'll talk about a bit later with this in the Cold War. Really fascinating what happened there with music, right? And state-sponsored music, et cetera. So, but basically through music, you can create a different feeling, right? For example, you go to a funeral, you go to a wedding, you hear a certain type of music that creates a type of emotion. You have emotional expression, right? You can obviously express yourself emotionally through music. You may be drawn to certain types of music by the emotions they convey. It gives an outlet to music. At the same time, it also sort of presents the acceptable range of emotions in a culture, right? It presents the acceptable types of music. It can also be used to create hatred, to create violence against a certain ethnic category. It can be used to associate. Just look at film, certain person walks on screen, you hear some dissonant atonal music, or you hear like a happy song. That sound, whether or not you're aware of that film soundtrack, is creating an emotional relationship between that image and your experience, right? So great, but it also can be used to resolve conflicts. People can play music together. You can sit down with your wife after a fight and put on the James Taylor record, have a glass of wine, everything's fine. But that's another very important part of that. Any other comments? So. But also go ahead.
Good. No, go ahead.
But also really can be used to manipulate what you feel, right? It can be used to directly act on the emotions and basically.
Like when you're watching a movie and there's going to be an intense murder scene and you hear that, the music gets really intense in sound and you can feel your heart racing, not because of what you're seeing in the movie, but because of the music.
Exactly right. But it can also be used to manipulate your emotions in that For example, if someone you go political campaign and they're playing a pop song for, say, John McCain, that's manipulating your emotions, especially if you've been conditioned by some of these rituals, right?
So it would be like Bill Clinton playing the sax on MTV back in the days,
Well, possibly. I mean, that's essentially giving him like a more human touch. But for example, if you've been inculcated with cultural associations with a type of music, right, a certain song touches your heart, that almost becomes a vocabulary that can be used, right? And okay, this song, so you can use these songs as little pieces in your toolkit. But you can also, change. I mean, you can directly operate on someone's emotion, or you can create feelings of terror also.
So like these guys, like they played Barney or whatever it was in the metal containers in Iraq to torture the Iraqi prisoners, playing these kid songs over and over and over.
Yeah, it's used as torture, actually. Or for example, having a song like I mentioned, like "Don't Fear the Reaper," right? Which is, something that I just noticed just the other day is that, but it's a very soft song. It's very soothing. The music is soothing. So the music is soothing you while this message of two people committing suicide, and suicide is being gently massaged into your brain, but it's manipulating you to accept that as a pleasant thing.
It's just like all of the sexual messages in the music today. It's to encourage people, just like from Aldous Huxley, to go out and have random sex with whatever. No more, no more marriage, no more baby carriages, etc., which is the introduction, the song for my show here. So that also, I can see how it would play in on all of those levels. They're selling all of this degradation on every level.
Yeah. And at the same time, it can be used in a very positive way if you're listening to a Bach cantata in a beautiful cathedral, right? That's going to affect your emotions, but it can give you maybe a sense of peace and serenity, right? So it's very, very interesting facet. And then I'll go to my next point, which gets a little bit more abstract, but to me is I find very interesting, which is sort of my own research, is that music also kind of can create a virtual map of mental processing, right? Music can influence music actually can work to develop spatial temporal processing. It can also manipulate spatial temporal processing on a cognitive level. But music, as it operates within a culture, at least as music, would operate in, say, traditional society, it creates certain models of relationality and possibility, right, that are sort of subconsciously inculcated. If you look at a symphony, a symphonic work, you have a very vast spectrum of sounds and tonalities. You have a pretty ordered system of development of themes. So it's sort of mirroring a type of social order. But yet you have a very broad range of possibilities of movement, of possibilities of understanding. And so it really works kind of on the abstract, sense of perception of space and time and sound. And that also can delineate the field of the possible. That means the field of possible actions that can be undertaken. How can I perceive this world? How can I interact? What is my place in this field of space-time within the society? This can manipulate. It can either expand it or close it down. Example being gangster rap. Look at the music. You look at the music being constantly reduced, constantly being more and more simple, more and more aggressive, more and more amusical. And that reduces, it actually directly works on your ability to learn and your ability to process information, process new stimulus. So, and it can have direct action on the psychobiological level. For example, techno music, which I'll talk a little bit in relation to the man-machine, transhumanism, mechanizing your sense, drawing you away from the natural world. And so this is really, I would say, the kind of maybe the deepest level. And it's maybe the hardest to elucidate clearly, but I think in a sense it ties everything together, because it does it allows a sort of a direct operation onto the field of consciousness, but also can transform even the possibilities of perception. So if your mind has been so dulled, you can no longer even see or perceive certain things in your environment, or even believe you can even take certain types of actions.
And then when you going back to the rap music, so if a 12-year-old is playing rap while they're doing their homework, it's going to seriously impede their ability to properly complete that task or whatever, essentially, right?
Yeah, and it's, I mean, if you look at the studies of how music can operate, directly on the brain, right? Directly on the mind. This is beyond the symbolic level. This is beyond, any kind of associational meanings or even emotional responses. But on the operation, development, or retardation, so to speak, of processing of information, of different types of cognitive processing, as well as if you have also arousal, the fear, adrenal gland, operating on the adrenal gland, operating, shutting down certain types of emotions. So there's a very, and sound in general, right? And this can kind of lead into, if you look at EMF warfare, but I think on a sort of a philosophical level, if you look at the possibilities of how do you relate in a society, if your relationship is someone running I'm not meaning to bash rap music if there are any, Snoop Dogg fans out there, but if you're hearing a monochromatic drum beat going and just some guy just purveying, his ego, this is showing you how society operates. It's a single guy. Right? It's not showing a bunch of people interacting together. It's not showing a large scale type of social organization. It's showing you a type of atomized social breakdown, with very rudimentary complexity, right? So it's very I think interesting and powerful phenomena in music.
I saw something funny this morning that somebody posted on YouTube, or on Facebook, which was really funny. It had a picture of Snoop Dogg and Martha Stewart on camera together, and it said, "Only one of these two is a convicted felon."
Yeah. But interesting, Snoop Dogg went into reggae, right? He changed his name. He started doing reggae music. So that's also, you're leading people down a particular path, right?
Sure.
And maybe he had a transformation. Yeah, Rastafari came to him, right? I don't know. So,
and I've looked into the history of reggae a little bit, and it's got some interesting connections there too. I haven't had time to flesh it all out, but Marley was definitely into some movements down there. Marley's dad was a Jewish plantation. He was the head of a plantation. He controlled the plantation. So there's all of this stuff. I mean, his story isn't as quite cut and dry as the public has been told.
Yeah, and Marley had his. Marley was also most likely assassinated. But that's another story there.
Well, and interestingly, just on a quick segue, Rita Marley has really profited off of marketing soda pop and everything and Bob Marley's name. And now, apparently, I came across an article last year where now Ziggy Marley is, he lives in Israel. So, there's a lot there to, for potential investigation on the background of the Marley family. And I think Bob Marley's dad was also in the British Navy. So Noble Sinclair Marley, British Royal Marines.
Yeah. So very, very interesting, right? And
he's another musician, child of military, whatever. I mean, how many times do we need to see the same pattern like out of Laurel Canyon?
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's and and again, as the complexity of this, right? So I've, gotten through these points. You can see that, it's not just a cut and dry or a single thing, but you have this multidimensionality. For example, Bob Marley associations, with certain things now being used to sell products. So it can be used on a very mundane level. On the other hand, it can be used on a much more powerful, creating a mass movement, mass social protest, or, inculcate use of cannabis products, which, or et cetera, so many different things going on there. And then, the final of my eight points is that I like to look at also cultural narratives, history, and identity, right? So music is, or was, really a repository of entire cultural histories, right? So means of transmitting culture. It's a means of, in fact, you can almost look at certain types of music being a model of society. If you look at Baroque music and Baroque society, it's almost you can see it serve as almost a sonic map of fields of social interaction. But another example is that your history or cultural history or identity a lot of times can be conveyed through music. And if, for example, so many people, their music may be the only surviving aspect of their culture that's left, right? There's people that have been dispersed all over the world, and their music will be the sound of that violin and the song from their grandfather. But that creates a thread of a much larger identity, as well as creating a larger scale historical understanding of the world, right? Or it can, in an ideal sense. At the same time, you can erase historical narrative. You can erase a sense of understanding of connection to a larger type of history. You can manipulate that cultural history in a very deep way.
Yeah. All right. So East India Company.
Yeah, well, that's an example of the use, not necessarily manipulating the music, but changing the cultural narrative of the music's association. I'll talk about that in more detail, but in 1799, Sir William Jones wrote a book called On the Music of the Hindus, with 2 O's. And he described this music as a remnant of a once great Hindu culture that had been corrupted by external Muslim invaders. The actual reality was that Indian classical music developed directly as an intersection of Hindu and Muslim cultures over several hundred years. But this cultural narrative has proliferated and, in fact, has created, it was part of the larger divide and rule strategy of the East India Company and going on today. Look at contemporary India, Modi, and all this stuff. So this is an example of how important and how powerful changing the cultural identity. There's, groups will fight over who owns a certain music, this music belongs to us or belongs to them. There's even been battles fought over who owns a particular cultural product. And if you can manipulate that grand narrative, and this is the East India Company, their educational process we're looking at that today. So this is had major powerful implications. Another example of this is the Irish and their ballads, right? Even the IRA. I was just talking to my friend who knows people in the IRA, describing how their music served as their identity and helped them to fight the British, right? The ballads themselves were these narratives, these emotional narratives of this cultural history, as well as creating a powerful, cohesive group identity and the ability to fight, against what was looked at as an oppressing power. And I don't have the exact quote, but there's this quote basically says, "I don't care who prints the money or who runs the government, as long as we can make our own ballads." So, that
as long as we can make our own ballads, that's funny.
Yes, yeah. So, if you look at particular, and obviously we're in a mass different kind of culture, but so this is the final aspect. But if you can manipulate this cultural history, or you can do that, so you can really, we talked about music of the 60s generation being played everywhere you go. You go on an elevator, you're in the doctor's office, you don't get to hear those beautiful strings anymore. You're hearing the Eagles or whatever. But that also, it takes the sense of a way of cultural development. It reduces our history to this narrow frequency band.
Right. And so now everybody, you're either stuck in the crap of today or you're stuck in the crap, and sorry, all of you Doors and Beatles fans, etc., or you're stuck in the crap of the 60s. I mean, they've manufactured the culture and then they keep everybody stuck. 50 years ago, it's like, okay, this is as far as we're going. Here's the music. Here are a bunch of military intelligence bands that we threw together to develop the music for you. And here it is. And now we're just going to repeat it for the next 50 years. And I wonder, 50 years from now, will people be turning on the radio and still be hearing Rolling Stones, Beatles, Doors, Blue Oyster Cult, etc., the same thing repeated, and every once in a while they'll add, a couple of songs from one era or a couple of bands in, and into the classic rock or whatever, and then they just kind of repeat that stuff ad infinitum and keep the whole society stuck there. I mean, it's so sad when you see somebody in their 60s or 70s and they're just stuck in the, late 60s, early 70s mentality. They hear that song and boom, there they are.
Yeah, but also, going back to my previous point, it affects your ability to perceive yourself as a component in a much larger historical narrative, right? If you're educated, classically educated 100 years ago, you're going to go back to the ancient Greeks. You're going to be thinking, quoting from Shakespeare, quoting from the Greeks. You're not going to be quoting from, Janis Joplin, and so at the same time, you could look at it even on a metaphysical or a spiritual level of reducing the entire development or flow of society as in a deeper way, like arresting the development of society,
which of course is a band, Arrested Development.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's very interesting stuff.
All right, so what else there?
Okay, well, now the way that I try to go about kind of putting all these...
Oh, I guess it's a TV series. See, I'm not even up on pop culture to know the difference between a band and a TV series, apparently. Sorry, everybody. There was one too, okay.
I think so, yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, in my professorial incarnation, I used to teach like history of rock and stuff. So I'm not going into that too much because I could really go into that in depth. But an example in the academy now, they're no longer. I mean, I started getting a lot of flack when I tried to talk about tradition. I'm being told that there's no longer any tradition. I said, no, I play sitar, and this is being passed down from father to son over 7 generations. No, tradition doesn't exist. There is no tradition. There's no cultural development over time. And there are no distinctions between cultural productions. So a highly advanced, highly intellectual, highly developed form of classical music is akin to the worst kind of, industrial punk rock. You can't even make any kind of hierarchical developments. And now pop culture is being taught across the board as the foundational underpinnings, as opposed to, you used to have to learn about, classical music. Now it's pop culture, because we're not allowed to believe in any kind of tradition. We have to believe that everything's the same, and the products of mass commercialized social production are the same as highly refined and socially organized life-affirming art forms. And if you say that, you go to hell, basically. So it's kind of interesting that this narrative is so ubiquitous that you can now the social engineering, you just can't hide from it. Now it's a steamroller. I mean, now I don't think there's any. If you're denying it, you are either completely lost, or you need, you're really a conditioned automaton in certain aspects, Oh,
and that'll upset all of the automatons.
Well, I love you guys. We'll talk about the automatons a little bit later, because you guys have a long history. But but basically what I use is a system of nonlinear dynamics, nonlinear systems theory. I won't go into that into too much too much depth, but you really have to look at all these different layers and avenues and interconnected fields that are interacting in complex ways and complex trajectories, but sometimes creating particular fields. So if you look at, the, Bobby, my little case study, who played the Velvet Underground for his parents and got, alienated from his family, if he becomes a college professor, he's going to perhaps teach popular music culture and have a very positive relation to that. But at the same time, this one particular cultural artifact is now in a totally different social system, in this case, the academic universe, right? But it's still affected with economies of scale. All these other factors are there, but it's creating a whole different configuration in this particular locus. And I'll get into this later. It's a little bit complicated. But when you look at this system, you have to look at the process of mechanization, even developing towards transhumanism and these development of New World Order utopias, which is, in a sense, what we're moving towards. Whose utopia?
All this, transhumanism was developed by Julian Huxley, and all of that's promoted by Julian and Aldous.
Yeah. And also you look at economics, economies of scale, migrations of populations, globalization. All these play into music and the interplay of music and the social. History, memory, and meaning, the corruption of philosophy, which is a whole nother thing. And my stance, I'm sort of a Heideggerian, and so I think that stream of philosophy was, when that got cut off, we went into sort of the neo-Marxist Frankfurt School. That was a major impact, I think, on the development of culture as a whole, which is a little bit, again, another topic. But then also to look at the reduction of individuals into social units, social control units, easily controlled, observed. If you look at the algorithms, predictive behavior algorithms, looking at society like that, they're using also dynamic system theory. So why not use the same tool to understand the control grid, right?
And that goes back to Rianne Eisler's husband. What was his name? David Loy.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was heavy. Yeah, David Loy, he was heavy into developing exactly that. Sorry to interrupt there.
No, please interrupt any time. And so we again, using this kind of system dynamics, I a little bit talked about atonality, but you look at the impact of atonality and then later sort of popular music, or at least dumbed down popular music, as kind of a destruction of grammar. The perception of tonality and order is directly connected with our ability to process linguistic grammar, but also in the trivium, to process and understand these elements. So if you look at atonality, is really a means of attacking the means to understand the social order, much less the social order itself, right? Or the means to even process information on an individual level and make sense of the world around you. So all these things are interconnected. They interact and create different subsystems, kind of like weather patterns that will form and coalesce and then disperse. So, again, it's very interesting to examine this, and hopefully, just getting this kind of large scale overview, we'll be able to go into some more specifics and really help clarify. And hopefully, some of the listeners are making their own connections as they're following us.
Now, did we go into Soviet control of culture?
No, actually, well, I want to just talk a little bit about the philosophical underpinnings of the system.
Sure.
So this is not a new concept, right? The understanding of music and society. We can find this, going back thousands of years. Plato, very famously in the Republic, noted the danger of music to society.
Right, and he wanted to ban musicians and poets, didn't he?
Yes. And music as being extremely powerful, dangerous, and potentially subversive element in the culture. And then in ancient China, just as an aside, every time a new dynasty took place, they would change the tuning of all the instruments. So, and the music itself would change for each epoch because it was creating a new era. And this was seen, the harmony of music and the harmony of the state were directly aligned, directly connected.
Wow. I did not, never knew that. That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah, and it was the particular, the new dynasty would be creating sort of a new order or whatever, and so that by retuning the instruments, they would, in a sense, tune the society as a whole. And in fact, the musicians, almost on a, you could say more on a metaphysical level, were considered to maintaining the balance of the state, the individual, and the social and nature together through music and even the instruments themselves. And so, yeah, very, very interesting with that. But if we look at the sort of the underpinnings or the impetus for some of this music in control, we can go back to Descartes, who described, he said that ultimately the rulers will become lords and possessors of nature, and described man as a clockwork automaton. So he really applied a mechanistic model to the human being and the creation sort of a rational society or a technotronic society with the idea of total subjugation and control of nature, and putting everything in a system where nothing is left to chance but follows the regular production sort of mechanisms, at least for people like us, perhaps, except for the ruling overlords. And then we go to Thomas Hobbes, a great writer. Leviathan is kind of his famous book, his great Utopia. And he directly says out that man is a virtual machine. Man is basically an automaton. He runs everything, the heartbeat, everything is a type of mechanism. But at the same time, man is fundamentally disorderly. Common man is a disorderly animal, prone to violence, prone to irrationality. So this requires an absolute total control grid and requires submission to that control grid, looking at, again, as people as simply machines that must be manipulated, because otherwise they're just going to run amok and just will have total anarchy and chaos. And I have a quote from, and he says that why not, Hobbes says, why may we not say that all automata have an artificial life, but actually implying that the human beings, in a sense, are automata as well. So even looking at machines as living and human as living machines. So this is going back quite a long time. And then we have John Amos Comenius, who's a Moravian theologian, kind of philosopher, and he was very much following a similar rubric, development of education as a system to kind of impose this mechanization of society and controlling the human automaton. And a quote from him, quote, "It would be pleasant to see education carried out in my plan as to look like an automatic machine." And he talks about even, he introduced the 40-hour work week. He taught, this is back, I think this was written about 1650, talking about creating this system, mechanized education, as well as a mechanized workplace. So this is not new. And then Francis Bacon, his New Atlantis, his kind of utopian ideas. In England, we have the Invisible College, another group working on these ideas. Invisible College was a group founded in 1646, used to meet in a tavern and kind of discuss this utopian scientific society, which is basically a type of technocracy. So that's kind of the basis. Well, to start out with, to understand that this is not something new. This is not something that happened yesterday, but this is something that has developed over centuries, and something that people have been aware of for centuries. And our contemporary society, really you can see the success and the high level of pervasiveness of these methodologies, which of course we look at Huxley and et cetera. I mean, obviously we have much more contemporary examples of this, but I wanted to kind of look at the philosophical mindset that goes into A, thinking it's possible, and B, implementing these type of things in case people think, oh, how could people do this? Everyone, you know.
All right, let's get into Soviet control of culture.
Okay, so if you want to look at examples of where this has been done in a society, well, so I just want to give a couple examples. I spent some time in Central Asia, so I got to see firsthand how the Ministry of Culture in the Soviet Union was used to directly rewrite social cultural history to, in a sense, create both ethnically fragmented but sort of nationalistically oriented social cultures. And so in the Soviet Union, if you wrote quote unquote corrupt music, you would most likely be executed or sent off to Siberia. And the control of music was very, very fundamental part of the Soviet project, especially under Stalin. Pre-Stalin, it was a little bit more fluid, but under Stalin, it was very, very central plank in their, government policy. And especially in these outlying republics, like in Central Asia, for example, some of these smaller, previously autonomous kind of regions, they really worked very diligently to define what the music of the culture was, to define how and who could perform the music, to define the mode of cultural transmission, and to have people create music that would align with what was described as narodnost, which is sort of the knowledge or spirit of the people, and kind of in quotes. But at the same time, cultures were split off. You have like Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, you have a shared culture. This shashmakam is a type of music, that very pretty ancient form of music, or old, going back at least to the early Middle Ages. And this was shared across these boundaries, but they wanted to create separate regions. So primarily the goal was not to not have a unified Muslim identity in the Soviet Union. This was looked as really the worst possible thing to have happen. So in Tajikistan, they went through and started eliminating traditional musicians who transmitted their music orally, either forcing them into educational institutions or executing them, exiling them, forcing them into absolute poverty, and then working on the construction of the instruments, what instruments were allowed, what the cultural tradition was, and then imposing a dogmatic, you could say, or a rigid body of work, a corpus, which primarily was, used through notation. So you had to use notated music, and you had to have, they decided to define what the ethnic identity of that region was, as opposed to other regions, which had their own ethnic identity, their ethnic dress. This sound a little bit familiar? Where the way they dress, the type of music they could perform. And this was defined in these little ethnic regions, which of course there were a lot of times there were indigenous things, but these were defined by the state, again, used to create small divisions within groups to, again, fracture the possibility of sort of a unified Islamic or maybe even Christian consciousness, but at the same time to develop a identity which both was connected with the smaller sort of defined people's identity as well as the larger Soviet state. So these were all seen as aligning. And there were also, an example also was the revolutionary movement, the Bolshevik Revolution also used music. And they had like a song, "To Bloody Battle, Holy in Righteousness," the Red Banner, boldly comrades in step. And these were songs, Bolshevik songs, right, which were used to help work with the Bolshevik Soviet Revolution. And so
the mass murder they committed across Russia.
Yes, just a few people died there, not too many.
About 60 million or so, but never mind that.
Yeah. But so in the Soviet and now in contemporary, post Soviet Russia, or in this area, Central Asia, you find the new national governments are doing the exact same thing, trying to redefine the culture, in this case, partially on their own terms, through music, redefining music, some cases trying to bring back the traditional forms. In certain cases, they're trying to, you have like Azerbaijan and they have a particular instrument that is linked with these two kind of conflicting cultures, and both of them are claiming this identity associated with this music. But you can even see that the dress, the types of dances, all these were imposed state down, and you might see a little bit of correlation with certain types of music genres in our contemporary America. So I don't know if you want to comment on that at all, or.
Well, I mean, when you see the Copeland family and their influence on music in the United States and how they helped to found the CIA, and then you see kids going around with concert T-shirts and stuff like that. I mean, obviously, in other countries, they're going to have typically a different type of dress that's a part of that culture, but you can see. If it's top down like that, it's these different styles of dress, the different styles of music. It's all top down implementation.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'll go. To
and I should point out that your first show here on Gnostic Media, you are an ethnomusicologist, and
Yes.
and I've read your book on ethnomusicology in India, etc. But so. This is, for you, it's an interesting standpoint because now you get to reflect back into Western culture and apply your ethnomusicology, just like I'm an ethnobotanist, and now I'm studying the United States and how they're implementing all of this stuff here. It looks like you're doing the same thing.
Yeah, and in some ways, it's easier to understand sometimes than another culture, right? When you can see it, when I can see in India how they're transforming the culture, through erasing traditional cultures by bringing in certain types of Western music, by changing the tuning of notes and stuff like that, by changing song lyrics. You can see India you look at the rape epidemic in India. That's an example of the sexualization of culture to sort of soften them up, right? So,
right. And of course, then they'll blame the men and everything for all of the rape, and not that this was implemented top down via government through music, etc. Just like, rape today in the U.S. with all of the music. And I mean, most of the music today is just so dumbed down and so bad. And it's, they're always trying to reach a new low with this stuff as well. And, society takes it. 50 years ago, if they had all of this sex stuff in the music, these people would have been taken out and beaten in the streets. But, today it gets on the primetime news, and Beyonce and all these, social engineers are, promoted, in our faces on the media. I can't even, I walk into a restaurant and sometimes they'll have TV on or something, but I might see TV a couple of times a year, and every time I even see it, I'm astounded at how much worse it is than the last time I saw it.
No, exactly. I mean, it's a little bit shocking, actually, when you see the rapidity, in a sense, of some of these things. Like if you look at the East India Company, this took a couple 100 years to fully implement. Now you're seeing stuff being implemented in months, not even say months, quarterly. It just keeps, people that are following it, you can say people that are entrained into the mass culture are being led down these particular pathways. And you can even say, to a certain extent, their minds are being shaped. And things like that. And it's in some ways it's kind of shocking, because I rarely watch TV myself, and I'm like, wow, this is. I think I keep people come to my door trying to get me to get cable. I'm like, no, thank you.
What's interesting is another aspect I've seen is, on the satellite radio, they have music divided up by decades. And you can go from like the 30s music and you can hear that. Then you get into the 40s music, and it's all this World War II stuff, rah, rah, rah. 1950s, it's like love and family. 1960s, they're breaking that apart. Literally each decade you can see it. So, I do find myself on rare occasion turning on the radio and less and less, just like TV. But it is interesting to study it from these, from this social control dynamic, rather than just, sitting there and thoughtlessly tapping along and listening to the latest retarded, radio talk show, right? So why don't we get into music as sociobiology?
Okay, actually, this music as psychobiology.
Oh, excuse me, music as psycho.
Yeah. So and this basically to understand a little bit of how this can operate and can work. Music regulates the arousal, which means your energy level, right? So your arousal rate, which means how much energy you have, or basically how active your mind is, right? Or, and also your attention, your direction of attention, your awareness, your ability, so to speak, to perceive, to take sensory data, to take experiential inputs and process them or not process them, right? So arousal relates to your heart rate, your respiration, the motor cortex, and in fact, certain types of the motor cortex can be activated, like learning certain types of music and things like that can actually start motor cortical processes. Sometimes, done studies where you hear someone playing the piano, and if you watch someone playing the piano, those parts of your mind can be activated with the sound and things like that. So it can directly operate on the motor cortex. At the same time, the attention, without attention, if you don't have the ability to be aware of and process cognitive information, the more that's reduced, the greater the difficulty of you coming to any kind of understanding, any kind of development, and the greater degree you can be manipulated and controlled. At the same time, you can increase your ability for attention through music. These things, of course, can be used in a very positive way. So,
how would you use music in a positive way after understanding all of this?
Well, I mean, one way is to listen to certain types of music that are either more complex, that require more participation,
such as.
This is a matter of opinion. I mean, if I play sitar, so I'm, sort of a proponent of Indian classical music. I think that Indian classical music is, just the understanding and level of attention required for that can actually increase. It actually is kind of like a workout for the brain, right? You can increase your ability to do things by listening to music. Western classical music is great. All different types of, all great composers, things like that. If to really listen and hear the development, to listen in a very sort of conscious way, and use this to develop your field of perception of sound. Lots of studies where if you listen, you're studying or trying to read a book and you have classical music in the background, it can help with your retention of certain types of information. Music can actually be utilized to increase your ability to respond to new stimuli, to cognitively process abstract symbolic patterns, and even to increase emotional responses, increase awareness of emotion, and things like that. So on the other hand, even a negative, some music that may be a negative form of music, you can apply your mind to analyze it and seeing what's going on musically, what's going on sonically. So that's a way that you can use that to sort of increase, or learning a musical instrument creates all kinds of neural pathways, and it's very, very good for the mind. So there's a lot of ways that you can use this for a positive stress reduction, things like that.
All right. Let's see. What about Rick Rubin?
Rick Rubin. Yeah, Rick Rubin. I may probably next interview I'll talk a bit about more about gangster rap. Rick Rubin is a producer. You guys know what he looks like. He's got a giant beard. He looks sort of like a Hindu saint somewhere out in the Himalayas, but he was a major purveyor of gangster rap, certain types of heavy metal, etc. But also New Age Kirtan. Krishna Das, who's a big, if you get familiar with Kirtan, Kirtan is a traditional Hindu devotional song, which is now a huge mass movement of music in America, in yoga studios all across the country. So Krishna Das is not his real name. I won't mention his real name, but
why not? If they're dirty, just expose them.
No, I forgot it.
Good cop out.
He's anyway, Krishna Das, is I think his last name's something Cohen, Michael Cohen or something like that. But he was like sort of he was gonna join. I think he actually was gonna be a member of Blue Oyster Cult, and then he stopped doing music, and then he became sort of a cocaine addict, and then he stayed with this guru, and this ties into Alpert. It ties into Ram Dass. He was out there with Ram Dass, and so
MK Ultra. Hey, we got back there again. That didn't take long.
So Krishna Das actually was the musician with Ram Dass, and so he.
And for those who real quick, for those who don't know, Ram Dass is actually Professor Dr. Richard Alpert, Dick Alpert, out of Harvard Social Relations Department. Millbrook Mansion. He worked directly with Timothy Leary and the other MK Ultra boys down there.
Yeah, and so Krishna Das, and so if any of you people that like yoga music, hey, I have no problem with them. But next time no. But Krishna Das helped after going through a time period where he became kind of a cokehead. Whatever, and stopped doing it. Then he found his spirituality and had this. And then Rick Rubin decided to produce an album, and suddenly you have this mass movement. If you're not familiar with it, there's Kirtan bands that play all across the world now, primarily in yoga studios. There's a big Bhakti Fest in California with this sort of Kirtan New Age movement. And the same guy, Mr. Mofo, doing kind of purveying pretty rough, some violent, types of music, is also promoting Kirtan, and he's also, I guess, also a Buddhist. But so, and we could, if the Krishna Das, Ram Dass connection with their guru, and that guy was a pretty shady character as well. You can find some pretty interesting corollaries between these mass movements. But but just to wrap up here, is that
sure.
A couple more points. The scientist Persuasion, he talks about cognitive penetrability, right? Cognitive penetrability is the degree to which a particular stimulus can penetrate the mind, penetrate an individual's processing mind and influence them. And so the cognitive penetrability of music, or certain types of music, is a factor in how this influences or can influence individuals, cultures, and society. So when you see the the fact that actually music can shape your brain, it can shape your ability to learn even. It can enhance or retard cognitive spatial development. If, again, the gangster rap, not to keep banging on that, so to speak, but but that's an example of beyond the criminal aspect, when you have people's actual ability to learn, not what they learn, not their desire to learn, but their ability to learn being affected because of the potency of music itself.
And then you have to think, why did they target the black community with that? And now you see that is spread out everywhere with Eminem and all of this stuff, and moving it from the black community into the white community, etc. So obviously the rap music was successful in its implementation as they wanted it.
Well, also you've got your wonderful new slave labor workforce in all the prisons, right? Massive increase in incarceration rates, and you have 50 cents an hour, not too bad. So you have the new prison industrial complex, so you can see this tying directly into, as I said, the dynamic system theory. You look at economic models, you look at et cetera. You see all these things working together or not, and then from that, which I'll get into that probably next time, but this idea of a holosonic control grid, a multi-dimensional sort of control grid, which comes through sound, comes through sonic means. And if you look at just one example, the use of background music in your grocery store, are you part of a holosonic control grid that's sort of appearing around you, right? So holosonic referring to the fact we're looking at 3-dimensional or 4-dimensional space. So I'll get into that in more detail. But in fact, that's kind of what, if you look even going back to Hobbes, in a sense, he would have, if he knew this technology was out there, he would have loved it.
All right. So let's hit this last point here. We're almost at 2.5 hours, so we're about an hour overboard here.
Okay. So I think that's the last point that I have, unless I...
All right. And, so let me ask you, Hans, as a musician, what can be done to stop or to make people aware of this, or what?
Well, I think fundamentally the understanding of the system is crucial, right? And I could have expanded each one of these points in a lot more detail, but when you see how these things interact and interrelate, and then see yourself as an individual in the system and do some work on understand how the mind works, understand at least some of the literature, on how attentional processes work, how neuroplasticity works. Understand these things, because these things are being used against you, or they can be used against you. Another thing is be aware of habitual responses. You can start observing people going into trance. You can see people, right? You can see, sometimes you're around, you see people start bobbing their head or moving, and you can observe that around you. So start being aware of the environment, start being aware of the sound in your environment. And then I think that to realize, even, and I'm not saying I'll listen to all different kinds of music, and sometimes I feel like listening to something, but try to be a little bit conscious when you listen to things. Try to be aware of, and sometimes you'll catch something, even subconsciously, that's affecting you, that's creating an unpleasant state. And be aware of the fact that a lot of times people are propagated as geniuses, or something is being said, oh, this is a healing music, or this is this. Sometimes the exact opposite is the case. Be aware of your own responses to something. See when you're going into a habitual pattern. See when you're being cued for something. Watch when it happens to other people. But then also to understand that, you can listen to music that's not tuned to A440, which maybe if we have another chance to talk, we can get into that. But
we're going to do part 2 next week on all of this. So, we'll go into the depths of all of that, and we'll have you actually give some examples for the audience.
But I think that realize that music can be extremely powerful, right? Music is not as innocuous as it seems. And if you can try to even educate yourself in forms of music that are more developed, that are, you can really not only increase your intelligence, but, it's some of these things that are being marginalized in our culture. If you take the time to learn this, you can really also develop your own mind, but also develop a whole rich area of experience. for yourself.
Awesome. Thank you, Hans. One last point I wanted to make here is, I've had a couple of people write me asking about dance, et cetera. And, next you're going to say that, I like to dance. And next you're going to say that dancing is bad. And, I like to dance to the Grateful Dead, et cetera. And, I think people will now begin to have the context for all of this to understand, how just thoughtlessly tapping along, listening along, nodding along, all of that does, in fact, put you into a trance and put you into a hyper-suggestive state. So, and I think dance goes perfectly along with the music. Would you agree with that?
Oh, totally. In fact, I could have discussed music. An example, just very briefly. If you look at dance like a waltz or a ballroom, right? You have the music there, and you actually have a model of the social structure. You have and it's inculcating ways of being in the body, ways of moving. So there's also embodied cognition. So your body, how your body responds and interacts in space, how you move through space. And certain types of dancing can be used, basically in the same way, but especially unconscious dancing. I don't want to, do any of this here. But if you look at this is 100%. That was pretty lame dead dancing.
Oh, but you only had to do this to put the message straight across. You see every hippie doing it everywhere. So.
No. So music, exact same thing. Dance and music are connected, and the control or the use of dance in society. These are sort of one in ancient India. Music, dance, and poetry were one unified art form. So certainly dance is a big part of this, but certain types of dance, which we see as regimented or controlled, right? These actually can help develop your mind. They can also, of course, be used for sort of collective ritualization control processes, but anything that develops awareness, spatial awareness, and discipline is great. Anything that's unconscious, and if you look at techno dancing, things like that, then you see even a more powerful example of this weight, so to speak, of the mega machine, of the monolithic holosonic control grid just being completely instilled on the body mind of unconscious participants.
All right. And with that, Hans Utter, until next week for your third episode here at Gnostic Media, and we'll be discussing far more on music as mind control.
And Jan, I'd like to thank you so much for both for doing your podcast and for having me on. It was a real pleasure.
And thanks for coming back.
Okay, take care.